Hey everyone, welcome to my video where I am going to review OREC's two contracts regarding sale of another property for your buyer. This is, you know, uh, oftentimes called a contingency contract. And I'm actually going to review both of these, ones that are presently under contract and one for one not under contract. But before I do, my name is Brad Anderson. I am the broker and owner of White Rock Realty, and we operate out of Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. And if you are not a White Rock Realty agent, maybe you should be. And you can go to this website here to find all you need to know about us, our compensation plan, our coaching plan, everything. And if you even want to set up an appointment with me, you can do that there. But this video is one of several that I've done regarding the Oklahoma Realtor contracts. And what I've done here is I've actually created this little cheat sheet where I outline what contracts you'll need for a listing, a buyer, and a lease. And if you want this, I can send it to you, no charge. Just reach out to me, either text me, call me, or email me, and I would be glad to pass this along, save you some time. Okay, so let's review what a lot of realtors call the contingency agreement, which means that if you represent a buyer, and this is pretty common, and they want to buy a home and they're ready to move, they hire you to be their realtor. Oftentimes they have another home that they have to sell to get the money to buy the home that you're about to go show them. Okay. So in our really hot market of several years ago, these were almost unheard of because homes were flying off the market. But now things have settled down a little bit, and it's not uncommon for a seller to accept a contingency offer. All right. But there are limits. All right. So if you have such a buyer, your offer will become a heck of a lot stronger if their current property is already under contract. All right. So this one is, makes your offer not as strong. And if the home has only been on the market for a couple of days, you may not have a good chance of getting your offer accepted, especially if it's not under contract yet or even listed yet, right? But we're going to go through how to fill this out if your buyer really has no other options. So it says this supplement is attached to and part of the Oklahoma Uniform Contract of Sale of Real Estate between the undersigned buyer and seller. Termination condition. The contract, which is subject to termination for failure of buyer to sell the buyer's property described as. So this is where you would put what home's address they need to sell. Okay. And so it's going to terminate if they haven't sold this on or before the closing date specified in the contract. All right. So now, if you want my opinion, I think the closing date's too late. I think that if you're doing, you're hoping that this home closes on the same date as the one you're going to buy, that can get tricky, right? But regardless, that's what it says. So paragraph 2, status of buyer's property. So buyer represents that either the buyer's property is now listed exclusively for sale with a real estate brokerage firm. So this just says, look, I don't have a contract on it, but it's listed, right? Or buyer will list the property with a real estate brokerage firm. So remember, it doesn't say for sale by owner. It says with a real estate brokerage firm within 2 days of acceptance of this contract, and buyer shall endeavor to sell it pursuant to the terms of the listing agreement. Okay, now remember that seller of this property that they're about to go buy is taking a big risk that the home is going to be priced right, that It sells quickly. I mean, what if it is listed and it's been listed for 45 days or 60 days? This is a truthful statement. It's not under contract, but it's listed. But boy, what's the likelihood of this thing moving? There's a lot of other questions that you as the agent have to ask your buyer to make sure that we communicate this to the seller. All right. So then it says paragraph 3, continuation of property on the market. Well, seller's property shall remain on the market. Seller may continue to show and offer seller's property for sale until the termination condition is removed. This is the termination condition. Got to sell that other house. Okay. Then it says, sellers demand a buyer to remove the termination condition. Well, why would this happen? Well, if they continue to show the home and they get an offer from somebody that doesn't need to go sell their home, they're going to come crying to your buyer and saying, look, you need to remove this condition or get out of the contract because I have somebody else wanting to buy the property. So it says, if the seller received and desires to accept a valid bona fide written offer, including a backup supplement from a third party, subject to no conditions other than inspections, title, survey, or mortgage inspection certificate, financing, or sales agreement, subject to the successful closing of backup buyer's property currently under contract, and conditioned upon buyer's prior right to remove the termination condition, seller may demand removal of the termination condition by notice to buyer or buyer broker. Buyer shall have until the date and time specified in the demand from seller to remove conditions, so that's a separate form, no less than 24 hours after delivery, within which to remove the termination condition in the manner set forth below. If the date and time specified in the demand in this form from the seller to remove the condition falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, the time to deliver shall be extended to the next day that is not Saturday, Sunday, legal holiday. Okay? So the seller has received a better offer. Seller's going to demand in writing through this termination condition, all right? Demand from seller to remove condition. Got to give him at least a day. And it can't be a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. All right, removal of termination condition. To remove the termination condition, buyer will either have buyer's property under contract to close on or before the closing date of this contract, subject to no conditions other than inspections, title, survey, or financing. This means that, once they sign this, a couple of weeks might go by, and for all we know, this buyer has put their home under contract. But it can't be such where that buyer has to sell their home. All right, that's what this means. And their home that they need to sell to go buy this one has to close on or before that closing date. That's one option. The other option is deliver to seller written verification from a financial institution or any other lender of the availability of sufficient funds or financing to close the transaction without the sale of the buyer's property. So option one is have the property under contract so you can get the money to buy it, or go have your lender give me a letter that says, I really don't, my buyer is okay with carrying two mortgages, or they already have the cash to cover this, so I don't really need this contingency. All right, so in any event, buyer shall give notice to seller of buyer's removal of the termination condition within the time period specified in paragraph 4. Such notice shall be accompanied by whichever is applicable. A true copy of a valid bona fide contract to purchase the buyer's property, or B, written verification from a financial institution or other lender of the availability of the money to buy it. Okay, then it says, failure of buyer to remove the termination condition. So if they don't do it, if they don't remove the contingency, if buyer, after the seller demands, fails to remove the termination condition within the time period provided in paragraph 4, the contract shall automatically terminate and become null and void. Okay? In the event seller does not deliver a demand to remove the termination condition by the closing date to the buyer, then the contract shall automatically terminate and become null and void. Buyer shall release seller and the respective brokers from any claim, demand, liability, or loss under the contract, and earnest money shall be dispersed according to the provisions of the contract. All right, so if the seller demands that they remove the contingency and buyer doesn't do it, the contract terminates. In the event the seller doesn't deliver a demand to remove the termination condition by the closing date, if applicable, then contract shall automatically terminate and become null and void. Okay, so at the end of the day, this document applies a condition on the contract, and if it's not met, the contract ends. Okay, so there's two parts to this. If the property doesn't sell, then the contract ends. If the seller receives another offer, the buyer has the ability to either remove the condition or provide documentation that proves they can buy it without needing to sell the other property. All right, so let's go to, what if the property's under contract? Okay. This contract is expressly conditioned upon the closing of the sale of the buyer's property described as, and so this is the address of the property needed to be sold in order to get the one that they want to go buy. Okay, buyer's property, which is presently under contract for a sale. A copy of the contract is attached to this contract. All right, so your buyer has to provide proof that the home is actually under contract. Now, some people have privacy issues, and I get it. So just redact any personal information from that contract and provide the needed proof that the seller requests that your buyer's home is in fact under contract. Okay, either this or this, the seller's taking a risk. All right, just FYI. So then it says, well, if the buyer has not closed the sale of the property described in this paragraph on or before X date or a longer period, as seller shall grant in writing, then the contract shall become automatically null and void. All right, so just because it's under contract, it has to close by a certain date. And if it doesn't, well, then this contract is over. Okay, in this case, the abstract shall be returned to the seller and the earnest money returned to the buyer, provided that the buyer shall nevertheless have the option, if they want, to proceed with the closing of the contract, regardless of the closing of the sale of the other property. So just because the property is under contract and it's not going to close in time, the buyer is still, they still have the option to move forward if they want. Okay, regardless of closing of sale of buyer's property by notice in writing delivered to the seller in care of the seller's broker 24 hours before the expiration of the date specified in this paragraph, which is here. All right, now notwithstanding the above condition, buyer shall immediately apply for financing as set out in the attached financing supplement, if any. And buyer shall immediately exercise buyer's right of inspection set out under the investigations, inspections, and reviews paragraph of the contract. So this means that, hey, buyer is under contract to sell his current home. It's not going to close, but buyer wants to proceed anyway. This just says buyer's got to go apply for financing. All right, if they even needed to, because it could very well be that the proceeds from the sale of this home are enough to cover the one that they want to go buy. Okay, so a couple of different nuances in each of these. As I mentioned earlier, both are a risk to the seller, but to have your home under contract already is going to make the strength of your offer better. Okay, so that's how you fill out each of those forms. I hope you found the video helpful. And if you have any questions, just let me know.